Going to call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will start our meeting with public comment. If anyone wishes to address the Board of Managers on an item not on the agenda or on the consent agenda, please come forward at this time, turn on the microphone at the podium, and state your name and address. We may limit the time for commenting if you have some comments, but we're certainly interested in hearing any comments that the public may have tonight. Is there anyone that would wish to address the Board of Managers? Yes or no? No? Okay. All right. Hearing no requests to speak to the Board of Managers, we'll move on to item 3.0, with approval of the agenda. And I'll look to the board for a motion to approve the agenda as is or amend it if you feel the need to amend.
So moved.
So move it.
Second.
And seconded. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Is approved as submitted. Well, we're a little ahead of schedule here, so we'll move on to the presentation of the 2016 by our 2016 audit, by our auditor, and we will ask them to kind of give an overview of the 2016 audit, and then the board will vote to accept the audit if there is a motion. Andy, if you're ready, thank you.
Good evening. The end result of our audit is that we issue an opinion on your financial statements. We issued an unmodified or clean opinion. We also tested for Minnesota legal compliance and issued a report there too, a clean report there. So a completely clean audit. The audit went well, so happy to report that. And I'll just do a quick summary of how the financials looked at the end of the year. So the district has multiple funds, and I'll go through a little bit of each of those. The first one is a general fund. The total ending fund balance in the general fund increased up to about $168,000 from $145,000 at the end of 2015. If you look at that compared to your 2017 budget, it equates to about 97%. That number is important due to a cash flow timing, with your main revenue source, property taxes, coming in about halfway through the year. Now, if we look at how you got to the ending fund balance, budget compared to actual, total revenues budgeted at $98,000. Revenues came in actual about $99,000, so very close to budget. Expenditures were also budgeted at $98,000. Actual expenditures about $77,000, so a total increase of $22,200 in the general fund, ending at $167,571. The next fund we'll look at is the implementation fund, so your main project fund. Here, a little more activity than the general fund. Total revenues budgeted at $912,500. Actual revenues came in at just over $1 million, so higher than budget by about $121,000. Expenditures, actual were about $834,000, budgeted at $762,000, so over budget by about $72,000. You transferred out $146,000 into your JPA MOA fund. So the implementation fund, you factor in all the revenues, expenditures, and transfers out, increased about $53,000, ending at $372,000. The district does have one debt service fund. You have bonds outstanding of $810,000 that mature in 2021. Total assets at the end of the year about $27,000. This bond is being paid back by property taxes that are levied on an annual basis. So you have 5 more years of principal and interest payments over the life of that bond. The last 2 funds of the district are related to the JPA MOA. You have the operations fund and the emergency fund. The operations fund increased $68,000, mainly due to the transfers in of the $146,000, and in fund balance there is $259,000. Your emergency fund remained about the same as last year, increased about $400, ending at $261,000. So that's a summary of all the funds of the district. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Andy. Are there any questions from the board members?
Mr. President, I have a question. In the larger book, the Navy Blue book, on page 20, why did the pension liability almost double from 2015 to 2016?
The pension liability, that's the Paris statewide pension plan that the district is part of. So you recognize your ending net pension liability, just to give an overview. The pension saw an increase in that net pension liability. I think the biggest contributor was that it was the difference between actual investment earnings and what was used by the actuarial assumption. So that's what caused the biggest increase in the net pension liability that's recorded. So that all employers in the state, whether they're city, county, schools, are seeing that increase.
So you mean the return, they didn't get as good of a return as they thought they would, and that's why the liability went up?
That's one of the bigger contributors. Yeah, so what their actual return was compared to what was used as an assumption for the rate of return, correct. And they do have, if you go to their website, they realize that there was going to be this large increase and that there were going to be questions. So they do have a memo on their website that does explain why it increased in more detail than that too. So I do recommend going out to PAIR's website and taking a look at that memo.
Any other questions from the managers? Andy, thank you very much. I think we're good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, 4.2 on the agenda is the chair is looking for a motion to approve the audit as presented. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, accept the audit, not approve the audit? Minor clarification?
Yes, yep, I'm sorry. So I'm looking for a motion to accept the 2016 audit.
I move that we accept the 2016 audit.
Okay, Manager Breitbach moves.
I will second that.
Manager Spitzmuller second. Is there any more discussion? Any more discussion? All in favor by aye?
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Andy. Okay, we're going to move on to item 4.3 on the agenda, which is permit number 17.03, the Prairie Lake Road reconstruction projects. There will be a vote at the end of this presentation. Maggie, I think, or Jamie? Maggie?
Mr. Chair and managers, so last week you went in your board packet, you received some information and as well as a staff recommendation. And since that time, the City of Prior Lake staff has been working with our district engineer, Carl Almer here, and they've been working on to resolve a lot of those items. So our recommendation's actually changing. And with that, Carl is going to present some new information, and then I'm going to be handing out a revised staff recommendation as he's talking. So Carl, if you want to come up, I'll see if I can get that going.
So Carl, if you would just introduce yourself for the,
Carl Almier with EOR, Engineers for the District. As Maggie had said, we had sent out a recommendation in the board packet, and we have received new information from the city this afternoon and have reviewed that information and have a forthcoming revised recommendation. What I think I'd like to do, since it is kind of an expansive project, almost actually over 2 miles of roadway reconstruction and or rehabilitation, is just kind of give you an overview. And I'm not sure if I can control from here how to get the screen that I'm seeing up and in front of the managers, but I'd like to. Okay. So I'm going to be referring to some images on your screen and up on the board, kind of a breakdown of the project into 4 areas that was referenced in that engineer's report that's in your packet, and just kind of give you an overview of where the water is flowing, what the end receiving water body is, and what kind of the flow path is in between. And then also, as I'm speaking about each area, I'll speak to the stormwater management elements that either exist en route between the project area and Spring or Prior Lake, or what's being proposed by the city as part of improvements for this project. So if I could. Okay.
I have it on extended.
so Carl, this document that we're looking at with the red print on it, is
Yeah, my
that-
chicken scratch from this
Yeah,
afternoon.
no,
yeah.
that's fine. I just,
Yep. And don't worry trying to interpret that at this point.
Okay.
Let me give you an overview of kind of the project, and that'll make more sense. Then I'll go briefly through that at the end. Oh, you can't see it now. I'm going to try just describing it without.
Maggie, do we have a copy on 365?
Carl, in one of these red things that talks about conditional approval, was that just a part of your chicken scratch, or was that something different than an approval?
In the terminology that you've used through past permit reviews, that would be, well, at the end, I think as we go through this, it may make more sense, but what we'll be recommending is, rather than tabling this permit application tonight, that you consider approval with conditions.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Manager Spitzmuller, you look like you're ready to go.
No, I
Okay.
was just, for those in the audience, I don't know, did everybody get a copy of the agenda from the back? But we're dealing with the watersheds has a role in permitting the streets projects that the city of Prior Lake has started or is going to be starting here within the month or so. So that's the first item, and that's what we're getting set up to talk about here, is permitting a number of street reconstruction areas in the city.
So I won't be able to, with the way we've got this up now, kind of use the mouse to pinpoint things on the screen, but you should all in front of you have now an image, I hope, in front of you. So there's 4 areas that this project covers within the overall city area. This we're referring to as the Balsam area. So you have Balsam Street, Spruce Circle, Spruce Trail, Sunrise Avenue is the area. Everything that you can see kind of in that grayer area is the roadway that's either going to be reconstructed in full, and that would be, in this case, the western half of that, or the eastern half is just rehabilitation where they mill and overlay within the curb lines that exist. Not mill and overlay, but grind it all up and put down new asphalt. So without the pointer, let me try to just give you an overview of what you're going to see on each of these figures for the 4 areas. If you see, there's 3 kind of blue lines. Those represent storm sewer that exist within the project area. The red, hopefully, that is coming up on your screen is the stormwater management that the city is proposing to do new within the area. And then there might be some notes as well, like in this case, 4,800 linear feet. That represents the approximate area of reconstruction in this area alone. So not quite a mile. And then you'll also see maybe some other notes that I'll kind of try to point out as we go. So for this project area, there's 3 discharge points from the project. If we start in the upper left portion of this image, there's a little number 2. Storm sewer from basically the northwest quarter of the project area discharges currently to an open ditch in Sunset Hills Park. Right now, there is no stormwater management proposed other than the passive treatment that occurs as it goes overland flow through the ditch down to the south, where you see another blue line, which is the endpoint of the kind of southwest area storm sewer, where that goes across Sunset Trail and directly to Spring Lake without treatment as it exists. So we have kind of those 2, the western half collectively going to Spring Lake. What is being proposed by the city at this point for treatment is that lower left, the manhole sump and skimmer structure, which will help with floatables and some of the gross particulates. I'm suggesting that there might still be the possibility for another opportunity for stormwater management in that open flow path in the park that we want to talk about. The other thing that you'll see on all these images is intensive street sweeping. The city has a very robust program for anything that is in areas where there isn't formal stormwater features that are providing treatment. So that's kind of that's always, with all these areas, a form of treatment that the city is proposing to continue to do intensively. The eastern half, roughly, of this project area discharges to a large wetland to the southeast of this project area, and then actually wraps that wetland, discharges back to the south and then west and back over to Spring Lake. So that's the overview for the Balsam area. What is being proposed is 1 manhole sump and skimmer at the direct discharge point to Spring Lake, and then you have passive treatment in either wetlands or an open ditch. And that's it, I guess, for this project area. Unless there's any specific questions, I'll just keep rolling to the next areas to try to keep this moving.
I have a question, Mr. President.
Manager Hannes.
I live in this area, so I know it pretty well. Have we checked the discharge of the water that goes into Spring Lake underneath Sunset Trail? Do we have any idea if it's good, bad, or in between? Through that culvert? You know what I mean?
Yeah, is this coming out of that park? Yeah, no, we haven't tested that water, not at all.
Okay, this area, citizens, is it's basically no curb and gutter with just the lawns going right up against the edge of the asphalt, and I've seen a lot of water go rolling through there. And interestingly enough, in this Sunset Hills Park, there is a softball field and a soccer field, and right along there, between there and the road, Sunset Trail Southwest, is a lower area where a lot of standing water accumulates because of incorrect slope or whatever. And every spring, it's just a big big mess of water that's going no place. So, all right, thank you.
So we'll go to the next area, which I can't control, I don't think. Oh, Sycamore, yes.
Carl, if you do want the pointer, you could sit here.
I'm fine. I think
Okay.
unless folks aren't tracking me, I'll stay here. Otherwise, this is a smaller portion of segment of the project area, 940 linear feet. When this went out with the board packet, the features that were proposed was the bioretention basin, kind of that blue feature to the northeast. That serves, you'll also sometimes see on the roadway segments kind of a red line crossing it with arrows going either way off that line. That's a drainage divide. So you can kind of start picking up where things are flowing. So it's really only that last 250 feet or so that's getting down to this bioretention basin. But what you don't know is there's actually, from this, is about another 7 acres roughly of drainage that will get to that bioretention basin, and that's coming from the Willow Beach Trail area and the houses kind of south of Sycamore Trail. So in this case, there was a known existing problem of erosion from this overall neighborhood in that area that's proposed for a bioretention basin. They're putting in retaining wall and creating a feature at that corner. It won't necessarily serve much of the reconstructed roadway, but it is serving a much larger offsetting drainage area to that feature. And it'll be discharged to that feature via curb cut right at the kind of southeast, north is up on all these figures, southeast corner of that bioretention feature. The other two main things, again, sumps and skimmers, first and foremost to provide pretreatment before that bioretention basin, but also for the storm sewer to the west that discharges directly to Upper Prior Lake. Again, the intensive street sweeping. So we can move on to the next area unless there's questions of this particular area. Oh, I should also note that what you're seeing now, you probably can't see all the detail. All the green highlighted areas were I guess, changes to the plan since the report went out on Friday to today, where the city added a gate so we can actually control or hold water in this basin to have better volume control versus just filtration. Erosion protection downstream of the curb cut. Modification of the underdrain system so that we don't have short circuiting, adding the sump and adding the skimmer structure. This is the cross-sectional detail of this bioretention basin. There's a couple things that we still wish to work with the city on the design detail of this. Right now it's proposed as 5 inches or 6 inches of engineering filter over rock with just a high maintenance turf on top of this feature. And I think there is opportunity to still look towards the state stormwater manual guidance for appropriate soil depth so we can get better form of treatment. And maybe there's an alternative cover or vegetation establishment plan that still is maintainable via mowing, but maybe is not just the turf grass that's being proposed.
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
That's a high traffic, high volume area. When you decide what you want to handle that for intensification, heavily used path.
And that's good input for the board as well. I mean, what we're suggesting, and obviously the city can bring these points to our attention as well. We're looking at it purely from a stormwater management standpoint. Other intended uses or existing uses of that area should be obviously taken into account as well.
Can we back up one slide? Just at the bottom of that slide, I mean, apparently some of you guys are residents, but the bottom of that slide shows there's a very significant gradient in that area. That's a pretty good hill coming from south to north as well as off Sycamore. So that's, is the retention area, I mean, is that sized appropriately to kind of capture the volume of water how is that calculated, Carl? Is that I assume somebody's got a handle on sizing that thing appropriately?
Mr. Chair, Manager Spitzmuller, the city has sized this feature following guidance from the state, utilizing kind of MIDS, minimum impact design standards for looking at that feature. If you look at what you see in this figure, basically the top half is a plan view. You're looking down from the sky at the feature. The bottom half is cutting the grade and the storm sewer, so you can see elevation difference. But as Manager Spitzmuller mentioned, the kind of vertical cylindrical features, those are manholes with storm sewer, and you can see that there's quite a bit of elevation change that is being accommodated via drop structures in that storm sewer to get not only the water down the hill, but to do it so in a fashion that it doesn't come with high velocity. You're using basically that drop as your energy dissipation, and then having a flat pipe come out of those storm sewer structures to get down to the bioretention feature, actual grade of that feature.
So your comment is that part of the, that's an association, is that a common area used by?
Excuse me. To the microphone and identify yourself.
Sorry about that. My name is Jason Anderson. I'm the president of the Willow Beach Association.
Thank you.
We've been working with the city on this project, and when we heard that they had to go and cut up on the hill anyway, we actually took your proposal, I believe from 2013, for the rain garden, and they took that and put that on steroids with the catch basin and everything else, because we're redirecting more water than what is originally going there now. So I think they needed to accommodate for that. But that area that you're talking about is the only flat spot we have. So what happens is that's where a lot of the traffic goes. As you know, we have golf carts. We go down. We do a switchback down that hill right there. So that's the only flat spot we have to get across and then come down. So when I say high volume, it's, you know, high impact too. It's bigger, you know, vehicles, golf carts, as well as foot traffic. So
I'm hearing you say you're comfortable with this plan?
yeah, what this does is it helps us improve the lake, which we tried to do years ago, but at a budget that wasn't, you know, wasn't going to happen.
We know about the flood.
We took advantage of the city doing this. This helps us do our part, and this helps us with the DNR when they say, what have you done to improve your erosion? So if we want to reclaim sand, you know, and go below 904, we can say we've done projects to help so we can reclaim sand rather than lose our sand blanket. It also ensures that with the money the city's putting into this, they're not going to put a road over that. Because that was a concern, as they were going to extend the road Sycamore and bring it through to Willow Beach Street. So,
great.
Thank you.
And just to remind the people in the audience that the district's responsible for the water quality protection, stormwater management, but not necessarily all of the details of the construction project. So that's what we're looking at tonight, and we appreciate you being here. Carl.
So I think I'll move on to the Kate's area, unless there's other questions on this area. One more slide. So jumping a little closer to downtown, this includes almost 2,500 linear feet of street reconstruction, basically Kate Street east to Park, all the way wrapping back east and to the north to Pleasant Street, and and the two little cul-de-sacs, CJ Circle and Five Hawks Avenue, off of that. There are 3 primary discharge points. I'll work from kind of the left of the page over to the right. So Five Hawks, in and of itself, that avenue is its own little drainage area, and it drains to the south and directly to Kate's Creek. What's being proposed with revisions that came through today is a skimmer, and I have a question mark on a sump. That's still a clarification. It's referenced in the narrative, but I don't see it on the plans. The next area of discharge is essentially from Five Hawks Avenue working east, including CJ Avenue, and then about halfway further over to Albany. So that kind of middle of the project, again, discharges to Kate's Creek directly, and what is being proposed at that last manhole is a sump and skimmer structure. And then we finally move to that, you'll note number 6, kind of the last discharge point for this area, which includes everything to the east, essentially, except for a short 100 feet or so of the north end of the project. That is all being routed to essentially a dry pond, that blue square that you can see is kind of sketched in at the 90-degree turn there, east of the 90-degree turn. Originally, you saw the engineer's report questioning why this couldn't be enhanced to be bioretention or filtration, and based on additional information the city provided, I do concur that, you know, they really just can't go that direction for providing enhanced stormwater, primarily because of the shallow groundwater. And you guys all probably know that area better than I even do. You start working to your east and you get into several kind of smaller water quality ponds, and then that large pond in line with Kate's Creek itself. So we're pretty much at water table here. While there might actually be physical elevation to work with based on the storm sewer elevation, we're going to be encountering groundwater elevation. So digging it lower and trying to filter is just going to be working within groundwater. The only other thing that I would point out on this area is kind of in the bottom left. Right now, another thing that I had questioned in the report that you had in your board packet was kind of at that southeast intersection of Dutch Avenue and Park Avenue. There's a existing low area. The city, it's not under city ownership or easement or anything. But I was questioning if that could potentially be an opportunity to enhance that existing feature now, and the city's response was that would be something that they would be willing to look to as part of their 2018 road projects. But it's not within kind of the, you know, the scope of this project area this year. But they'd be willing to take a look at that a little bit more closely. And then we'll move to the last area.
I got a question on that.
Excuse me, can you just come up to the speaker and identify yourself? Thank you.
I'm Tim Henning. I live at 16411 Albany, right where that dry pond is. I don't know what a dry pond is. And then I know you're going to switch stuff around coming down Albany, and it's going to go around a curb, and all the water coming off the houses north of me, it's not going on the street. It's going to go in a dry pond then, or what's the plan? I mean,
Carl?
I live right here.
Sure.
And right now there's a road there. I mean, just a dead-end street. I don't know why you can't leave it, but obviously I can't win that one. But so is this going to be a wet, pond? Nothing in it, and just dries up and...
I'll explain. I can step back to the mic here. So, and Nick can jump in too. I'm reviewing it from a stormwater management standpoint, but Nick did mention to me the main purpose of this feature from the city standpoint is that, yes, there is a little stub road that goes maybe a house or a lot depth to the east. That's right now the city's primary access to get to those ponds that we talked about for maintenance. And my understanding through talking with Nick is there has been some drainage issues in this intersection, And the proposal for this dry pond is to have a low point to pick up and address the drainage issues just by having a place for the water to get to and then get right back into the pipe system.
I can clarify a little bit more, Mr. President and managers. That area, as Carl said, is really, it's going to be, what's that? Oh, sorry. Nick Monsrud, City Project Engineer. That area is mostly just going to be a swale. We're kind of playing with the size of it. We have flooding in that area. We're raising the road a little bit, adding some more storm sewer infrastructure as well on that curve. So really it's just going to be a swale with an open culvert, a ditch with a culvert at most. We still have to get maintenance trucks past that area to get to our ponds that are farther to the east.
Mr. Hannon, does that answer your?
Culvert, you said? It's going into your existing pond, lake down there, or whatever you want to call it?
It'll go into the storm sewer and then ultimately.
So the water will not collect down on that pond, into my yard and stuff.
That's the goal, is to get everything out of here.
Farrell.
I think that's the end of the slides. No, Franklin. We do have Franklin still. There's one more area. So this section of 2,600 linear feet of road, primarily Franklin Trail Southeast, working from Highway 13 almost all the way back over to County Road 21, and then a short section of Bluff Heights Trail to the north of that. The majority of this drainage goes kind of to the center of the page and then to the north, and you can see the blue existing pond, kind of kidney shape on that picture. And that is an existing stormwater management pond. It is within the city's maintenance purview where they operate and maintain that pond. It is known right now to be having accumulated a lot of sediment. You'll see the note of 2018-19 maintenance. They're prioritizing maintaining, i.e. go and remove sediment from the pond for that schedule. I wonder if there's also an opportunity to look at it more in terms of just a NERP pond, but is there an opportunity to look to see if it could be retrofitted like some of the other city ponds have been in the past, whether it be a filtration bench or something else. I would like to see the city consider that in the future as well. The other discharge point is right at the intersection of Highway 13 and Franklin Trail. With the revisions that came in today, they are adding a sump. I guess I still have the question mark on the skimmer. I wasn't seeing that in the plan, but that's clearly the intent of the city to add that, as well as the sump kind of midstream before it gets to that existing pond. All of this runoff goes to the north, kind of follows the ditch, the eastern ditch along Highway 13, and then gets up to the southeast intersection with County Road 21 and Highway 13 before it goes under a culvert under Highway 13 and then over to Cates Creek. So this one's kind of upstream of the last one that we just talked about. So that's a whirlwind of these four areas. Any other questions on what's happening within the drainage thereof, or
Mr. President, I have a comment.
Manager Hennis.
Just so everyone understands, is Franklin Avenue is used as a cutoff by a lot of people going north on 13 to avoid going up to the main intersection. They cut through there to get east on 21 to get out of town to get to the freeway. So it's a very heavily traveled area despite it being 99% residential. Also, the other areas that we talked about, Sycamore, Balsam, Cates and all them, those are all areas that are adjacent to the new Charlie's on Pryor. And I go through there all the time, of course, from where I live, and there's a lot of traffic going on there too. And many of these areas that Carl has talked about have big changes in elevation, and they've all got no curb and gutter. as Chief Engineer Poplar pointed out, if you don't have curb and gutter where there's a lot of elevation changes, elevation drops, you can't really control the water that well. So these are all needed both for storm water benefit and for traffic benefit too. Thank you.
Any other questions from the managers? Anyone else from the audience? I believe we're going to move on to voting on this permit. We have a staff recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to speak to, I haven't seen the memo, but just to give you a quick update of where,
Carl.
now that you've seen the big picture, how this fits, how does it comply with district rules, to kind of inform why we're making a recommendation change at this point. So just kind of high level, there's very little increase in storm or increase in impervious surface. This is obviously an already developed area and heavily developed area, tightly constrained right away. There, you know, if you look at it in whole, there's roughly 3,000 square feet of increased impervious. It's very minor. If you look at it a project basis, there's maybe a little bit more if you disclude the part that's being taken away in Kate's. So I guess that's a long way of saying that in terms of looking at rate control compliance, which is something that you usually look at with development and redevelopment, are the rates being increased. There's no real increase in storm sewer capacity being proposed here, and that very, very minor amount of impervious increase is a negligible amount, so rate control is a non-issue. The feature off the end of Sycamore Street is sized, because of its the larger drainage area coming to it, sized sufficiently to meet volume control for the district as an overall. So what we really have left is whether or not the project complies with the full intent of district rules to provide water quality treatment. And, you know, existing rules make a lot of sense for a new development. Maybe it's not the best fit for redevelopment. That's something that and reconstruction of roads. That's something that we'd like to address with rule revisions. But regardless, the existing rule would say, you know, provide stormwater management for the 2-year event. And what's being proposed is obviously not that. The features in line do provide some treatment. Obviously, the intensive street sweeping provides an offsetting measure that is probably almost equal to that standard. And then the sumps and the skimmers are providing kind of that gross particulate and floating measures at the discharge points everywhere. So, I mean, our recommendation is still going to be to conditionally approve this with minor design tweaks to the features that are there and some clarifications. But I did want you at least to know that our recommendation does recognize that it doesn't meet the full water quality standard of your rules, but your rules also do have a provision under Rule D, the stormwater rule, for recognizing existing constrained systems and an ability to incorporate to the max extent possible stormwater quality. And having gone through this, I feel like the city has given a good faith effort within the right-of-way that they're under control for this project in getting stormwater management incorporated. So we'd be recommending that the district approve this ultimately, right now, conditional approval, recognizing that waiver for something under exceptions under district rule. So I don't know if I really need to go through all my chicken scratch there, but our recommendation is been updated for kind of a conditional approval by the board pending receipt of the items listed in the memo that Maggie provided you. And if there's something else that Maggie you wanted to say.
So Maggie, do you have a staff recommendation? And again, for the people in the audience and on the listening to us through television, the board is considering approval of a stormwater management plan, but is not approving the project as a whole. That's the responsibility of the city council. So this is our part of this approval process. Maggie, you anything to add to Carol's comments?
Mr. Chair, no, that very well sums it up. I just want to give a thank you to the city of Prior Lake for working with us to getting it to where we need to be, and for all Carl's work on this. Mr. Chair, did you want me to speak out the recommendation by the staff?
Yes, we do.
So staff at this time is recommending that the project be approved, subject to the application submitted, the supplemental information submitted by the applicant's engineer, and with the conditions noted below. And because these weren't listed in the board packet, I'll just kind of run through them. So we're asking the board to make a motion to approve the permit subject to the following conditions. And what I handed out earlier was the same engineer's report that you received last week, but the items that are circled are the ones that we would like to see resolved or followed up on by the city. Those are items 1, 2, 3, 8, and 10 to 12. The second condition is that all other required permits and approvals be obtained. The third is that they provide contact information to us for the responsible erosion control contractor. Sorry if I'm losing my voice a little bit here. The fourth is that we're waiving the permit fee deposit requirements. The fifth is that we are requiring a security deposit for $1,000 per acre of disturbed area. The sixth is that the city's responsible for stabilization and maintenance of the disturbed areas, and that we're requiring an as-built survey within 35 days of completion. And my voice made it through all that, so I'm very happy, but that's the staff recommendation.
So any questions about the staff recommendation from the managers or from those in the audience?
Mr. President, I have a question.
Manager Hennis.
What is the time? I see you've got 35 days. Will supply an as-built survey within 35 days of the completion of the initial installation. But is there a timeline for the permits to be to all these conditions to be met? Is there a timeline for that?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, so they'll have to resolve items, the items in number 1. They'll have to resolve those before we issue the permit. And then all the other requirements, with the exception of, I believe, number 2, that all the other ones come later, but they're a requirement before we close out the permit, if that makes sense.
Manager Spitzmuller.
Thank you, Fred. So we'll provide some written, in terms of this conditional, the items that are circled in this report, the city will get some documentation of those conditions, and we will provide that within a brief, at some point near term.
Carl?
Mr. Chair, Manager Spitzmuller, I envision just having a follow-up call with Nick tomorrow to discuss my concerns or thoughts on those items. So,
Manager Howley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. Did the city and the watershed work together to potentially, how we've got a budget item to do some stormwater enhancements on public projects? Were we approached by them on this project to see if we wanted to chip in or do anything as an increased enhancement?
Maggie?
Mr. Chair, Manager Howley, I don't think we were approached early on this, but we were included in that biofiltration basin. We talked about it at a staff meeting with the city. But
yeah, Mr. Chair, Manager Hawley, I'm getting the hoarseness too. So what happened is that Pete Young actually contacted me about the rain garden idea that gentleman had expressed earlier from the Willows project. And that was something that our board looked at several years ago and decided not to move forward on it. And what I said to the city on that project is that we didn't have the money in our budget for 2017 for an additional project. We have money in there to complete projects the city has already requested from us, so that if they wanted us to help them, we could do it in 2018. But we really would like to ask the city, and I've already talked to Nick about that, so that as they're considering projects ahead of time, give us some notice so that we can put it in our budget for the next year.
Okay, thank you. Next is the intensive street sweeping. I have a little bit of an issue in saying, well, that's, I mean, yes, that's a BMP, but should that receive a ton of credit to overlook the intent of the rule for volume control, water quality control, what have you? I think the city of Prior Lake does do a little better street sweeping than other municipalities, but I have a photo on my phone right now that I just showed Woody where I got at least a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of sediment in the curb line in front of my house right now. In fact, the whole neighborhood does because of a crack and seal project, and hasn't rained in 5-6 days. But the next time it rains 1/2 inch, there's going to be maybe a yard or more of material in the wetlands and in the stormwater ponds. So it's fine to say that we will have intensive street sweeping, but you have to do it, and you have to do it when you need it. So I'm a little grumbly right now just because it's right in my front yard, and I don't, we sit here as a board trying to keep sediment out of the waterways, and there's going to be a lot deposited here and next time it rains. Some of these opportunities, why can't we get it in with the project? I presume it's funding, maybe has to do with right-of-way or easements, but that's the point of a project, is to obtain right-of-way, obtain easements, include it in the funding, not look at stormwater management as an afterthought and say, oh, well, what can we do for stormwater management? Well, let's throw in a couple sumps, say we'll sweep the streets and call it good. If this came to some of the other watershed districts in the metro, it would not get passed. It would need variances. It would be tough. And maybe our rules aren't written the same way and we're a little more lax, but I don't think this meets the intent of our rule. But at the same time, I do agree with Carl. There is only so much you can do specifically with high water table. But look what Savage brought last month on Zinran, that big elaborate system underneath the road. That's a lot of money. Now, granted, the site conditions there allowed them to do something like that, but I don't see anything like that in these plans, nothing. So, I'm struggling a little bit. If Carl, as our engineer, says it meets the rules, well, then I trust him, and it meets the rules, and I don't have a problem supporting this. But it's a bit of a stretch. And one of the conditions is consider of potential stormwater management enhancement. Well, how are they going to meet that? Either they're going to do it or they're not. Considering should have been done months ago, not the day after we grant a conditional permit. So, I'm not going to throw up any roadblocks from the permit, but I think we could have done a better job. We could have been contacted about this a year ago to get it into our budget about potential projects. We've got opportunities circled. Well, these opportunities could have been a reality if we were contacted earlier, if funding was the major issue. So that's kind of where I stand on the whole thing. It seems like this is the opportunity to increase our water quality when there is a large construction project, to correct what wasn't done 20, 30, 40 years ago when the road was put in originally in the storm sewer and they didn't think about it. We have discharges directly into creeks, which directly go into the lake. Yeah, sumps are great, but they only do so much. So that's kind of where I stand. Again, I trust Carl, I trust his engineering review, and if it meets our rules, that's great. But I just struggle a little bit with this plan. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Manager Howley. Some missed opportunities, maybe. Manager Brett Buck.
Mr. President, managers, I have a question here, and this may seem really lame, but when I see intensive street sweeping, you know, that's rather subjective. So is there a program in Prior Lake for intensive street sweeping versus regular non-intensive street sweeping? And could that be identified, please?
Nick.
Mr. President and managers, we do have the two different street sweeping programs. As far as knowing the exact merits of each, scheduling how many times a year for each region, I don't have those numbers.
If I can add something.
Manager Hennis.
I live on Sunset Trail, which I live, you know, right next to Spring Lake, and we've already had 2 street sweepings done this spring. And I think they concentrate on doing these roads that are near the bodies of water more so than the other streets. My guess would be they probably do it twice as often as they do the street sweeping on the streets that are away from the bodies of water, you know, safe from a lot of runoff. But we've had it twice already, and by the way, it's terrific. I think it makes a big difference.
So maybe we could get a definition of those two for the next meeting, Manager Spitzmueller.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Just briefly, right, Kurt, I think intensive street sweeping is in areas of the city that drain to the lake. That's my understanding. As you point out, Kurt, I'm on Greenwood Circle, and they've been through our area twice already this year. So I think, Charlie, that really addresses, I think that's the city's terminology for sweeping areas that drain directly to the lake.
Thank you, Nick. Carol, do you have anything you want to add to Manager Howley's concerns?
Mr. Chair, I would be stepping into commentary here, and not strictly just the letter of the rule.
Just the engineering, please.
Charlie brings up valid, questions and comments. Your rules, however, provide a lot of, right now, unfortunately, somewhat flexibility in terms of the range, and we have to work within that and still work with your municipalities as partners. But you do have valid observations. We need to look at that rule revision too, and be a little bit more in line, not necessarily just using other watersheds as the benchmark, but making sure that your rules at least give due consideration to the inherent difficulties of working in a road reconstruction setting, redevelopment setting as well. But always still kind of push for trying to get, what is most prudent, reasonable, cost-effective on stormwater projects. And yeah, maybe if thinking started on this from the watershed being a partner a little sooner, maybe there would be a different outcome. Who knows? We might be still saying, well, those are still areas outside of the confines of this project. Let's get those planned, but they're still not happening until a later date. So there was definitely a lot of thought at staff level of how to bring this to you, and yet be fair to the city and how they brought this project forward as well.
Anything more from the staff, audience? Okay, apparently, given some time constraints that certainly came up in this action, we do have a board action before us, a motion authorizing the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District staff to issue a permit subject to the conditions that Maggie outlined. Is there a motion to approve that action?
So moved.
So Manager Hennis moves, second.
I'll second that, Fred.
Manager Spitzmueller, any other comments? Any other comments? Manager Howley.
Sorry, I was getting ready to vote. No comment.
Sorry?
I was just getting ready to vote.
You were ready to go. Well, if you're ready to go, let's take the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nay. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you for everyone in the room. And good luck. Okay, moving along to manager presentations. Are there any presentations by the managers?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Manager Breitbach.
I have one. This last past, I went to that Metro Mod meeting, and as you folks well know, that MOD is the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts, and they are going to be changing their bylaws and their budget, and they're calling it their strategic succession plan. So there's a summer tour, and they are hoping that there will be 2 managers there that will carry a vote from the board. I guess what I would like to know is if we would be interested to have a representative from MAUD that's been on the committee come to our workshop in June, which would be for the summer tour. I have talked to her. Her name is Mary Texer. She's just an A-plus woman that understands fully the bylaws and the budget, and if she doesn't, she will say she doesn't. And but she said she would be willing to come to our workshop. And so I guess what I'd like to know, if we want to have somebody there from the Metro Mod area that can talk about the bylaws and the budget as it goes forward.
So managers, I'm looking for some feedback. You're suggesting, I think, a 4 o'clock workshop in June, and to invite Mary to that workshop. She is our representative on the MOD board, this district?
Yes, she has been on the succession plan. She is also a manager at the Capital Region Watershed District.
Managers, any comments or thoughts on getting Mary here on the
It would be a good opportunity for Q&A, questions and answers, I think.
Mr. Chair?
I agree. Okay, so we will schedule that for 4 o'clock.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So the alternative would be if she doesn't come, we get the proposed revisions and you as a representative, and we kind of talk about it amongst ourselves to figure out how we want our voting to go. That would be the alternative if we don't get the presentation directly from her.
Yes.
Administrator Lynch.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Manager Hawley, I would work with Marianne on that because I've been a part of the transition team as well.
I guess, Charlie, my only comment would be that I think there's been a lot of history in the proposed changes that have been made, and I'm not sure the document itself or even Mary Ann's understanding of the documents that are coming forward might reflect as much as Mary might bring to a discussion, whether we need to start at 4 or 4:30 to have that. The one question I have is this, are we going to, the two, and I understand Manager Hennis and I are going to represent the district at the meeting at the end of June, are we going to be presented with a document to approve, or is it still an open document?
From what I understand, the draft document is supposed to be sent out around the 10th of May, so it should come to everybody. But I think what she would provide is maybe some of that background stuff that is hard to decipher in more of a personal viewpoint, more of a personal level rather than just a documentation.
Yeah, no, and I think I see the value in that, but is the document that Kurt and I will be asked to vote on, is that a fixed document, or is there still some changes that could be made at that meeting?
It's It's called the MOPP, M-O-P-P, in the world of acronyms. It's, let's see, it's the Manual of Policy and Procedures. So what they did is they took out the bylaws, they took the bylaws that are existing that haven't been updated since 2009, kind of ripped them apart and restructured them. So there are some things that have been taken out of the bylaws because with the way they are now is there are so many things you can't do because this bylaw is pretty clunky. So now it's going to be called the Manual of Policy and Procedures, or the MOP, and then the budget will be a separate document entirely.
Administrator Lynch, but my question is that it's an up or down vote. It's not a discussion to change that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, managers, yes, it would be documents to vote up or down.
And now, Mr. President, I have a question. Is this, it's an up or down vote as far as the whole watershed district body is concerned? And then there's individual votes by each watershed district as to whether they approve it? I mean, how does that work?
Well, I haven't seen the final documents, as Marianne, or as Manager Breitbach said. They're due out here in a couple days. But my sense would be there would be at least 2 votes. One would be for the MOP, and then one would be for the bylaws changes. And the bylaws change would have the budget, what the budget would be based on.
So the bylaws isn't part of the MOP?
Right,
Bylaw changes?
they're pulling that out.
So the bylaws will be done later in the year,
No, they'll be done at the same time.
but the budget will be done later in the year.
No, the budget will be done then as well. So what I understand that you would be approving, and again, I haven't seen the final documents, is number 1, the MOP, which is the transition plan, and then number 2, which is pulling the bylaws, pulling a number of things out of the bylaws, such as setting the dues, and that would be a separate action as well. And so you would know what the budget is for MOD, and then you would know how that budget is figured out, and that's the issue where it comes to what watershed districts are paying for their dues. So that would be something that would be voted on as a whole as well.
But the acceptance of the changed dues would be voted on when? At this meeting?
Correct.
So we would be asked to accept a different dues schedule at this meeting?
Correct.
Okay, then I guess I go back to maybe Manager Hennis's question. So are we going to vote on this, or are we going to have some authority to vote on behalf of the district?
Yes. That's what you would be voting on, MOD making those changes.
No, is at the June meeting of this district,
Sure.
will you authorize us to vote for these things?
Not
you, the board
Right.
authorize? Okay.
So what I'm envisioning, and Manager Breitbach, correct me if I'm wrong, that we'll have Mary Texler come in and describe this and answer your questions, and then at the board meeting, you can state, that the board supports the representatives voting this and such way on those questions.
I think that's a fair understanding, that the board would determine whether we wanted to vote yay or nay, and then the representatives would bring that forward.
And then,
Manager Hennis.
yes, and then, so, I forget what I was going to ask. Are you going to, are you going to have room in the workshop to squeeze her in for 4 o'clock? Have you already got that parceled out, what the next month's workshop is going to be?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, what we're thinking of at this point, it would be MOD, and then it would be going back and looking at the LM checklist. So it would be those 2 items, and so that's why we thought we needed a little bit extra time.
Other comments or questions? So I'm hearing support for inviting Mary to the workshop. That would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. I will, she's waiting for a response, so I will let her know. Thank you very much. But that's the only liaison thing I have to say. Other than I did go to the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District meeting, and boy, their issues are way different than ours. But a lot of when you say sediment, they have a lot of sediment issues. So, all right, that's all I have.
Any other manager reports? I did want to just mention that I did have a chance to meet with the city administrator in Shakopee, Bill Reynolds, to talk a little bit about the history of the channel and to follow up on meetings that the district has had with the city over the last month or two. And we had a good discussion, and I think there's some things that the district administrator and I will work on to respond to some of the questions. They're not. I think I could say with his support that this isn't all about engineering. It's also somewhat about just the politics of all of this internally within each city. And I think he wants to make sure that he understands the history, certainly, of the channel, and also the history that the cities have had, the cooperators have had, and especially this city in Prior Lake. So I think that Diana and I are looking forward to perhaps organizing a meeting with he and Frank Boyles to kind of catch Bill up to speed on what that is, and especially as we look forward to perhaps changing the agreement that we have. I would say that while there was some concern, I think all had that maybe this was kind of going south as far as the city was concerned. I didn't sense that. I think it was just he was looking for a chance to check in and get a little more information. So I think we continue to have a strong partnership with the city of Shakopee, and we look forward to strengthening that. With Bill has been here about a year, maybe. And I think part of, as we look at that rewriting the partnership agreement, it was fairly clear in his comments to me is that the administrators really don't have a role in the day-to-day business of the channel, and it's mostly an engineering discussion, and I think he thinks that there's probably needs to be a role, whether that's once a year or twice a year, to kind of allow the administrators and the political bodies to engage on an annual basis at least, so that they're not only consulted when there's something important happening. So I think we can do that, and again, I think it went quite well. Hearing no more reports?
I have one quick one on
Hennis.
Spring Lake Township, Mr. President. Two items. Kathy Nielsen, the clerk for the last 13 years, has resigned for a contract job in the 50 for 30 project of Scott County, and she is replaced by an attorney. Her name is Melissa Hansen. And Administrator Lynch, I would like for us to give her a formal invitation to come to our meeting next month to meet her. She's a very nice lady. I think we're going to see an uptick in cooperation and collaboration. Very communicative individual. The other thing is, in 2 nights, the township will be voting on this property down by the Raymond Park, where we want to do our project, our shoreline improvement, and they've met with the city of Prior Lake. They're now on the same page. So they're going to be passing the final needed okay that will let us go through. And I assume, Maggie, that we're looking at this month with Great River Greening getting out there. What's the status with that?
Maggie?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, Great River Greening is starting to clear out the buckthorn and other woody undesirable plants at the park starting next month.
Thank you. Hearing no more, we'll move on to 4.5 projects and programs update.
Okay, starting off with the level of Prior Lake, like always, it is at 902.8. We did open the low flow gate on April 25th. So the level of the lake is dropping now. If you were curious about what the flow is, I just wanted to show you on our website. Hopefully this works. That you can see that I showed you last month that there was a flow graph to see how much discharge there was. That doesn't apply when the low flow gate is open, but there is a link in that paragraph above the graph. So if you look at the lake level, it's 902.8, and then click on this table, you can check what the flow is leaving the lake, what it is when the gate is closed versus when it's open. So if you were curious about the flow, that's where you would look for that. Also, as you know, we installed a logger on Pike Lake last month, and the level of Pike Lake is pretty high right now, and you can see it staying pretty steady, and that is because the low flow gate is open, so there's a lot of water coming from Prior Lake into Pike Lake. Also, this looks like some sort of cartoon character burglar, but I assure you he's not stealing any of our ferric chloride, but he did fill the tank with ferric last month, so just wanted to let you know that was filled again.
Okay, so we, as you know, we have 2 summer interns coming in. These are both unpaid internships that we advertise, and we're very, very glad to get these 2 great interns in. The first is Suhalia Albana. Her nickname is Sue, so when you see her, call her Sue. She's going to be our water resources intern, so she's going to be doing a lot of the BMP easement monitoring for us, some of the permit inspections. She's also going to be potentially doing some bio-base with Jamie, and then whenever Jamie might need help or assistance with the flow measurement, she'll be out doing that, as well as PLOC inspections. She'll be doing a great variety of things, plus she's getting internship credit for this, so she'll be doing a special project as well. She starts June 1st, so we've got a little time before she comes on board. But then John Fesenmeyer, he actually lives pretty close by. He's over in Savage. He goes to St. John's University, and he's going to be our conservation intern. He's going to be doing a lot of the similar things that Sue's going to be doing. They're going to be working together to do inspections and to do permit inspections and that sort of thing. And then John starts on Monday, so you might see him if you pop in the office, and they'll both be working until about mid-August to late August for us. And then I just want to provide a few quick project updates. Over at the Spring Lake Wetlands, I wanted to take a picture of the before and after. So it's only been like a few weeks since our burn, and it's already all greened up and looking beautiful out there. So the left is the picture right after the burn, and the right is 3 weeks later. And also at the Spring Lake Wetland, the University of Minnesota is going to be going out there to stock the bluegills in that first pond as early as tomorrow, so it's going to be starting to happen pretty quick. And just for those of you who hadn't heard either, when the U of M went to do like the initial fish survey in that pond, they actually did find carp. So we saw some carp out there last fall, but we weren't sure if they would survive over the winter. But the winter was so mild, it must not have been a hard enough freeze, because there was some like just yearling carp like about this big in that pond. So although we're disappointed in that, we're hoping that the bluegills will do their job and give us some good information for bluegill stocking in the future. And then out at Fish Point Park, as you may know, we separated our vegetation maintenance contract from the original contractors at that site. So we just hired Minnesota Native Landscapes to do the vegetation maintenance for us for a couple of years. They're really good. They've got a really good name in the area. They're known for doing really good restoration work, and we're excited to get them on board. And then we're going to be having a volunteer planting event out there. So there's a scheduled neighborhood party on June 20th, and we want to get the park looking really good for that neighborhood party, where we can tell the neighborhood and all the folks who come about this great project. So we're going to be doing some native planting around there with help from the eco team from the high school. So they're going to be helping us out with the volunteer event, and then we're also going to be posting it on our website, so stay tuned for that. We'll send you more information as that comes. And then I just wanted to, I know that Tony and Mary will be coming up in a second to speak, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that they're doing. They just installed the drum barrier out at Gary Stevens' place out by the Silt Pond. So that's installed, and so that's what it looks like. I know we showed pictures of you guys of the drum barrier before, which was kind of smaller, and this is a nice wide one and big. And right now it's a little higher water than normal out there, so we're kind of working on how to make it work even better, but it's out there, and we're really excited how it turned out. And then they also went out today and installed some pit tag receivers, so hopefully they'll be talking about that a little bit. But that's the update on that.
Okay, we are still moving ahead with our memorandum of agreement document. We have worked with the Technical Advisory Committee on a couple meetings. We've brought it to the cooperators meeting for their comments. As Manager Corrigan mentioned, City of Shakopee has some additional things they would like us to consider, so we're expecting that we're going to see those recommendations at the end of the week. We are going to have another technical advisory committee to look at some of those possible changes, and we're going to be going ahead at that meeting on putting a proposed budget together. The operations and maintenance manual review, this is the manual that we're required to do primarily because of our flood study, but then we also were told by the DNR that we should not ask for any more opportunities to open the low flow gate until we revised it because it was pretty old. So Carl has been our point person on that. He's made some revisions. We have had some feedback from Jenny Skanke at the DNR. We're just waiting to find out what the schedule is, if she's going to run it up the flagpole from her comments or what the strategy is, and then we have to review it with the public as well. So, but we're really excited about this. It was a lot easier asking permission to open the low flow gate this last time than it has been previously. So, and the DNR indicated that they're anxious to let that go. So once they've approved our plan, we will be able to make the decision ourselves if we want to open it. And then you all know about our clean water cleanup. We're very happy with our partnership with the city of Prior Lake. We had over 80 volunteers that showed up, and we're not quite sure why. It was a beautiful day, and they could have been doing their own yard work, but they were out there with us. And we raked about 1,780 pounds of leaves, which is not as much as we have previously done, but that's because we gave them another option, which is to remove buckthorn. Now, who would have thought there would be so many volunteers that really wanted to help with the removal of buckthorn, because it is not an easy thing to do. We did have some buckthorn pullers out there that the city provided, and we also had the opportunity for people to pull out woody debris. So as you can see on the right, there were 7 dump trucks full of the woody debris and buckthorn. Quite an amazing amount of work that these volunteers did. A little anecdotal information is while we were out there, there was a resident of the community right there by Crystal Lake who said, "What are you doing?" And then we explained it to her, and she was really excited about that. And the next day, and this has never happened before, we had a resident call us to thank us. They said, "We are out there walking all the time, and it looks so much better." So it was another eye-opener for us, because we don't put signs out that say, "This coming Saturday, we're going to be doing a cleanup." Well, we should be doing that, because we'll get more volunteers that way. And it also is information for the community to know we're out there doing work with you. So we will do that, and we'll give them advance notice so we can get more volunteers signed up.
Thank you. A question maybe for you, Diane, or for Maggie. The interns, are they insured? And how are they insured for their work injuries or?
Sure. Mr. Chair and managers, anyone that works on our behalf as a volunteer or paid member is covered by our liability insurance.
Mr. President.
Manager Hennis.
What is the status of Oliver? Is he still working for us yet, doing work off his computer at St. Olaf College, or what's his status?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, he is working with us on a very, very part-time basis. We've had him scan maps for us, and he's had to come in the office specifically to do that and use the big scanner. When we moved the office, we had a lot of maps that we brought over that hadn't been scanned, so we're trying to get some of those done. He is graduating this year, so we're not sure what his availability will be. He's very temporary at best.
One more question quickly, Mr. President, is with the signs, I think the signs is a very good idea that says, we're going to be working in a certain park or whatever. But I think also once we're done, maybe on the flip side of that sign, you could turn the sign over when we're done, saying work was accomplished by the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed Volunteer Group. We did good PR, and people would see why is it so clean, you know?
Oh, that's a great idea. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Just a question on my favorite topic. How's the safety manual coming?
It is in a draft form, and the staff will be finalizing it.
So we may see it again sometime?
We will give it to you in draft form. Let me think here. I'm going to work with Jamie on this. So the June meeting, we're going to be focusing on the alum checklist. So let's aim for July. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Manager Spitzmueller.
Shelley. I noticed on the picture of the outlet channel that was taken obviously before Mr. Morlock moved all his equipment down there. Is that, do we have, is our easement permit him, have you been down there, Jamie, recently, or is any of you three, you know, that his boat lifts are almost, if they're not touching the outlet structure, they're as close as he can possibly move them there. Do we have any sort of a buffer under that easement? Maybe you guys can do a little research on that. But do they impede your access at all to the structure? I don't know, maybe.
Mr. Chair, Manager Spitzmueller, Carl Almeric can respond on that.
By saying I don't know what the easement says. Sorry.
I mean, a more relevant question was for staff, does that impede your work on around that outlet structure?
It doesn't get in our way of removing the vegetation, which is the main thing that we're doing in the lake. So it hasn't been a problem for us at all.
Manager Howley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, for you, quickly, the last bullet on the outlet channel maintenance. Fill first manhole with more concrete. Explain a little bit on that, please.
Jamie.
Okay, so last year we had IBA manholes come out and smooth the manholes in the outlet pipe to increase the amount of velocity or flow that can go through the outlet pipe. When I was at the outlet structure about a month ago, I was looking at installing some flow monitoring equipment in the outlet pipe, and I pulled up the very, very first manhole, which is just right off the outlet structure, about 10 or 15 feet down, and noticed that manhole was just kind of like a big box area too, and it had I thought quite a bit of turbulence in it, and I asked Visu Sewer and IBA Manhole why this manhole was overlooked or why they didn't address this manhole at that time, and they said, I don't know. I have to get back to you on that. So they looked into it, and nobody really knows why that manhole wasn't addressed. So at this time, I'm going to have IBA manholes come out again and give another bid to see what it would cost to smooth that last manhole, which is the first manhole, which I think is probably the most important one. So I wasn't really involved with looking at the manholes or any of that at the time. That was all Visu Sewer, which has been they televised the outlet pipe a couple of years ago, and they recommended which manholes that we should smooth out, and they didn't mention that one at the time, so can't explain why, but I think it should be addressed.
So it wasn't part of the contract for them to do that one, so
No.
it will be an additional work
Yes,
for them
it
to
will.
do it, and then that would happen next winter when there's no flow going out the outlet, probably.
Yeah, or we could shut the gate temporarily. Last fall when we did it, there was a little bit of flow leaving the lake, so we just shut the gate while they worked on it, and then it needs to be closed for a few days so that the concrete can form.
I'm not sure we're going to see any slowdown in the water coming out of that pipe anytime soon. Okay, moving along. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, the staff. 4.6, CARP management plan, and the packet is page 18, I believe. Welcome. If you just introduce yourself for the...
Good evening, Mr. Chair, managers, staff, and Mr. Ulmer. My name is Tony Havranek. I'm a senior environmental scientist at WSB and Associates in St. Paul. Tonight, I'd like to go over the draft CARP management plan, or integrated pest management plan, and then talk a little bit about the LCCMR, Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources grant proposal. So, can you hear me? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go over this kind of at a high level. I think you all have drafts of this in front of you. So there's some additional detail in the document, but I kind of want to hit each of these points separately, and then I thought maybe it'd be nice to get some feedback from you and have an opportunity for you to ask some questions about the document and about what we're doing right now within the watershed as far as carp management. So the plan describes the effects of carp on water quality and habitat within the watershed. Primarily, that discussion is taken from the TMDLs that were developed for Spring and Upper Prior Lake, and then also some discussion on potential effects of carp on aquatic vegetation. I think there's a lot of vegetation survey work that's been done throughout the watershed, and we have documented in other projects the effect that carp have on that aquatic vegetation. The plan also provides a current status of carp management within the watershed, and also the current data sets that we have on those carp. So things like the population estimates that we did, and then the telemetry survey results that we have for the entire watershed. And then the last portion of it is, or the last point of the plan is to guide future management and data collection. So trying to be pointed, trying to be focused on what's important as we move forward, and as we've accomplished some of the things that we initially set out to accomplish in the original MPCA grant, what are the things that we should be looking at, and how should we be strategically approaching those items? All right, so introduction. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this through a couple of really cool pictures in here, but carp were intentionally introduced in the 1800s by the predecessor to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And you can see there, by 1910, the Game and Fish Commission were contracting fishermen to net carp out. So basically trying to reverse that policy in a 30-year time span. The second part of the plan is really a description of the watershed and the water bodies within it. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this graphic from the website. And really, what we focused on up to this point are the main basins: Spring Lake, Upper Prior, Lower Prior, and to a smaller extent, Arctic Lake. This third part are the management priorities. So this is really the meat of the plan, and it's formed around an integrated pest management principles. So rather than trying to do just one thing or one management activity, that was previously used by other management agencies, really just forming these netting groups to go after carp and net them, leave the lake, and hope that that was enough to mitigate the carp problem. Really what we want to do is look at each of these principles that are outlined in this conceptual diagram, and the rest of the plan is really based on that. So what are the different parts of this integrated pest management approach that we can employ here within the watershed to sustainably control common carp now and in the future? The other thing I want to point out, and I think we've discussed it before, is carp management really isn't a silver bullet. It's just one of a suite of tools that the watershed can use to improve water quality, improve habitat within the watershed. And so it's the external best management practices combined with those internal best management practices that are really going to achieve that ultimate goal of improving water quality. All right, so we're going to start kind of getting into the plan. And each of these sections, if you look, you can keep that conceptual diagram, that IPM conceptual diagram in front of you, because each of these sections addresses that conceptual diagram. So I'll just kind of walk through these and kind of highlight some of the major points within that. And then we'll end with the summary slide. So the first section is the data collection. It's really trying to collect data on carp abundance, so quantifying the problem, what's actually there, how big is the problem, and where are those fish at? So how can we target them for removals, locate nursery sites, spawning grounds, et cetera. So we've completed to date some of the carp abundance data collection, the CPUEs, the catch per unit effort, electrofishing model that we completed last fall. We estimated 294 kilograms per hectare. I think that is the Upper Pryor population estimate. Yeah, you can see that on the screen there. That's the Upper Pryor population estimate. The number of individual carp is estimated to be about 7,622. And then we did pit tag, I think, roughly 150 this past December when we did the removal, but that's less than 2% of the population. So it just gives you some idea for the numbers there. One more. Is there one in between there? Well, it's just that border removal. Oh, yeah, that's so minimal. So that's the removal that we did last fall when we took those carp to the organic recycling facility. That was about 2 tons. But I just wanted you to see, 2 tons seems like a lot of fish, but when you look at it from a scale, lake scale perspective, we've kind of got a long ways to go there yet. Okay, Jamie. All right, so the second part of the data collection priority is the carp spatial usage. So using the radio telemetry that we currently have employed, and now using this new pit tag technology to really track where are these carp during certain times of the year, during spawning or foraging or really just winter aggregation events, and how can we use that data to further the management. So we've just got some photos there. You can see the radio tags. It's that small green and white contraption in the lower left-hand corner. The picture of me with the carp, that's actually the recaptured radio tagged carp. Rotten luck. So we've also got a picture of Catherine out there. So she's had an opportunity now to use the telemetry equipment and kind of increase the frequency of the data collection that we're getting. So once we're identifying some of these aggregations, especially in the wintertime, it's nice to have somebody here that can go out and confirm that, yes, those fish are actually staying there as we're preparing for removal. The other part of that spatial usage data collection component is the passive integrated transponder or PIT tagging project that we initiated last December. So the photos that you see there, the one on the left, it shows the contraption at the bottom of the photo. That's a scanner. So as we pit tag each of those fish, we're scanning them to get their unique identification number and make sure that tag is active. The image in the middle is the data logger. So we've got 2 of these sites operational, one at the Desilt Pond barrier now and one at the connecting channel between Spring and Upper Pryor. So that interface allows us to connect the PC and download data on any pit tagged fish that pass through the antenna array. And then the picture on the right is the actual antenna array that we've got installed on the in the Upper Pryor Spring Lake connecting channel. And here's just kind of a overview of where those pit tag stations are at. You can see the red lines indicate the locations. So the far eastern one, or the one to the far right, is on the channel between Upper Pryor and Spring. We've got the Desilt barrier pit tag station in, and then upstream on County Ditch 13. Tomorrow we'll be installing the 3rd and final pit tag station just below the ferric chloride site. So the purpose of those stations, so the station between Upper Pryor and Spring Lake channel is going to allow us to document movement between those 2 basins. There's a lot of anecdotal information that suggests that carp are using that. When we've been on that channel the last couple of weeks, we've noticed a lot of white sucker. No carp observed yet. We have spoken with each of the residents that live along that channel, and they've had some really interesting stories to tell about the channel over the years. Kind of a wide range of, I guess, wide range of people, of the length of time that people have lived on that channel, so it's really interesting talking to them about their observations. Some of the people that have lived there longer talk about game fish aggregations, walleye, bass at the end of the channel, and the amount of sedimentation that's occurred over time, potentially burying some spawning sites. And then other folks tell us about all the younger kids that come down to observe the fish as well. And we ran into a few kids as well, but we kind of took that as an opportunity for education and outreach too. They were really curious about what we were doing there, so we walked them through the process, told them what the equipment was. They seemed very interested, so we try to take each of those opportunities whenever we see somebody out within the watershed to kind of go over each of these projects that have been commissioned. So the middle station, the one at the desilt drum barrier, that will help us determine the efficacy of that barrier. So we've got an antenna just below and an antenna just above the barrier, and we'll be able to tell if any of our spring lake pit tagged fish are still able to get into the desilt pond. I guess the one question I have in that area, we've got the weir that splits off on the other branch with the culvert that dumps in. So that still may be a potential route for them. But the last or the westernmost pit tag station just below the ferric chloride site should pick up any fish that use that alternate route. So in a nutshell, that's the pit tag project for 2017. The nice thing about the equipment that we're using here is that it can be decommissioned and used in any other spots within the watershed that we see any movement or suspected movement of carp. So these stations can be moved all around as we install additional barriers within the watershed. And still on that second data collection component, tracking movement, I hope you guys can see the slide okay here. Basically what you're looking at, these are all of the radio tag locations that we've documented since fall of 2015. And you can really see where those aggregations are, both on Upper Pryor and on Spring. The aggregation site on the northwest corner of Spring Lake, that's the area that we seined with the commercial fishermen this past winter. And then the area on the east side by Manager Hennis's house, we have netted that at least once, but we've recaptured radio tagged fish there and marked fish there. And there's an indication that there's an aggregation forming there, but for whatever reason, we just did not capture a large number of fish in that spot. And then switching to Upper Pryor, in the plan, you should see a diagram that shows 3 what I would consider aggregation sites on Upper Pryor. One of those would be Mud Bay. The other one is along the eastern shoreline, not far from the Knotty Oar. That's an area that we've seined twice now, just to make sure that it's clear. And then the third aggregation site is we really documented that for the first time this winter, because this is the first full winter that we've actually had radio tags in Upper Pryor. The commercial fisherman has been out, he's sonared it both on the ice and in open water, and it looks like it's clear. He thinks he can get a seine through it. There's a small drop off on the northern portion just before it hits the shore, but he's fairly optimistic that he can seine that area. So those are the 3 main aggregation sites. The fourth potential site is that small bay just to the left of the boat landing, the Weedy Bay where the Spring Lake connecting channel dumps into. Last year when we radio tagged the final 8 fish, that's where we put the gill nets out, and we did observe a large number of carp in that area spawning. The problem with that area is it's so weedy pretty early, so to do an open water netting with the milfoil and the curly leaf would be pretty difficult, but I think we'll just make sure we keep our eyes on that site and take advantage of any potential opportunity to do any netting there as well. These 2 maps are the latest radio telemetry survey results. So you can see you've got a slight aggregation on Spring Lake, but I think these fish are pretty prone to moving. They're kind of staging right now for spawning. And so I'd imagine if we went out there tonight and did another survey, I think you'd be hard pressed to see those fish in those same locations. And then same thing on Upper and Lower Pryor. You can see those radio tags are starting to scoot down to that bay where the connecting channel dumps in. And then they seem to be staging up there in Mud Bay as well. I'm sure with the shallower water and the flocculent substrates, those waters are starting to warm up. And we saw the same thing last spring. A lot of fish seem to stay up in Mud Bay, but they didn't spawn there. So I don't know, the question I guess I would have on that site is, are the carp testing the Fremont Avenue barrier? And because it's there and they're not able to access Arctic, are they avoiding that and then coming down to that bay in the southwest side? That's an assumption I guess I would make based on where these radio tags are at. So moving on, beyond data collection, which was one of those integrated pest management priorities, we move on to the second one, physical removal. So once we're able to quantify the abundance of carp and determine where they are and where they're moving, we move into this physical removal, which we've already employed here on Upper Pryor and in Spring. And really the goal of that is to reduce biomass. Picture, I think both those photos are actually from the Upper Pryor removal. So that's Mary in the boat. That's the half of the 4,000 pounds we removed. I didn't try to load all 4,000 pounds in one trip because I think we were down about 4 inches of clearance just with the fish we had there. So that's half of it. And then the picture on the right, the picture on the right is Jeff Riedemann, the commercial fisherman that we've had an opportunity to work with here. He's not the licensed commercial fisherman for this area. Don Geyer is. We're still working through some permitting issues, trying to get both Don and Jeff on board to make sure that we have someone lined up to do it. So I've been working with Minnesota DNR staff out of St. Paul and also Daryl Ellison, the area fisheries manager, to make sure that we're taken care of either way. Second goal under physical removal is development of innovative removal techniques. This is included as part of our LCCMR proposal, which I'll speak about later. But I think this is a really critical thing to consider. One of the biggest stumbling blocks in a lot of these carp management projects is the inability to remove carp biomass, either because of obstructions on the bottom of the lake or lakes that just don't have fish aggregating in them at all. The fish remain spread out, and the amount of time and money that would be spent to remove those fish is overwhelming. So we have a few ideas outlined in the LCCMR proposal that we'd like to start employing. Some of those ideas are based on some work done outside of the United States, but I think they're worth looking at. You know, when we talk about invasive species management, whether we're talking about aquatic species, common carp, terrestrial species like buckthorn, I think some of these out-of-the-box techniques are sometimes what pay the biggest dividends. So trying to secure some funding to attempt some of these other innovative techniques. One of the other things that I can talk a little bit about is box netting. Mary has some experience from the University of Minnesota employing that technique too. So when we talk about biomass removal, it might be similar to IPM. We might not be employing just one technique like seining under the ice to remove this biomass. It might be looking at things like fish traps in their migration routes, box netting, electrofishing, and combined with seining to reduce the biomass to a level that's acceptable. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's something that we need to consider in the plan. A lot of the research that the University of Minnesota has done shows that bluegills are the main predator of carp larvae and eggs. Once those carp get beyond that first year of growth, there's probably not going to be a lot of predator fish in either Upper Pryor or Spring that are going to be able to take those fish out. So really controlling them at those early life stages are going to be key. And the plan is looking at what do we have in the main basins and those connected basins as far as the fish predators go, and doing things like habitat improvement or aeration to bolster those. And I think that dovetails really well with some of the current work that the U is looking at doing at the 1217 wetlands. So that data that's going to come out of that can feed right into this plan. And some of the other projects throughout the state and in Wisconsin, we'll be making sure that we keep an eye on those types of projects. So all of that data, this document should be living, and that's what's talked about in the summary. Yearly, we should be looking at this and incorporating new techniques, new data sets to make this plan Okay. Barriers is the next part of the plan. We identified this as an action item in the original MPCA grant. We knew that barriers are going to be important, especially based on anecdotal information throughout the watershed. Citizens and staff observing carp in different locations throughout the watershed. And so the telemetry data collection feeds right into this portion of the IPM priority. We have a picture of the Fremont Avenue barrier. That's the top right-hand corner. We also have a picture of what the PVC barrier will look like. So that's going to be installed in the connecting channel between Upper Pryor and Spring. And then, we can't see it, but I think you saw it in a different photograph. The picture on the right bottom corner shows the desilt pond drum barrier. So now we have 3 barriers employed within the watershed in documented migration routes. And so we should start seeing some dividends. It'll be interesting to see what the age structure looks like on carp within Upper Pryor and Spring, to see if the recruitment events have stopped, if we're not seeing young of the year carp. And same thing in Arctic. We know there's still a remnant carp population there, but if that Fremont Avenue barrier is working correctly, and that Arctic Lake was a nursery site, that should severely interrupt the carp life cycle in Upper Pryor and potentially even Spring Lake, depending on the amount of movement that would naturally happen between Upper Pryor and Spring. Oh, there's a nice picture of a drum barrier. So I guess staying on that same IPM priority, CPL, Conservation Partners Legacy Fund, that was the grant funding that the Watershed District received this spring to fabricate and install that drum style barrier. So that is what we have now at the desiltation pond outlet. And basically what it is there's a helical or a large auger on either side of the creek there. And then those boxes have a support for the ends of the axle that the barrier rotates on. So I think the landowner said he was going to hook into that and start having his power meter go backwards tonight when we talk to him, but I don't know, we'll have to see if that happens. But so far so good. The one thing I will point out is we do have a radio tagged fish or a radio tagged carp that made it in the desal pond before the barrier was installed. So we'll have to look at doing some gill netting in there to see if we can remove that. We were there today from about 12:30 to 5:30 installing the pit tag station. And I didn't see any carp activity in there. We did see bluegill just below the drum barrier on the downstream side of it. And there have been fishermen each time we've been out there just below the drum barrier. But I didn't see any carp activity. So we'll get out there, do another telemetry survey, see what we've got. And really the reason that those fish migrated up in there is we were waiting for the permit issuance. And so just between the fabricator being able to fabricate and install the barrier and waiting for that permit, those fish slipped through there, and now we've got the one up there. So we'll try to mitigate that. Education is the next IPM priority. We've already had an opportunity to work with a few of the local schools, and we had an opportunity to meet with the board last fall. And like I said, whenever we're out, whether we're electrofishing or netting, we typically have citizens that are curious about what we're doing, and really I've seen just a positive attitude towards the project in general. We'd like to further that and create stewards for this project and for other projects within the watershed. So that'll be an important part of the IPM. And then developing a citizen science program. We've included that as part of the LCCMR grant proposal as well. And what we thought about trying to do is do more hands-on educational opportunities. So taking people out, electrofishing, showing how we do the telemetry surveys, and then showing how we do the actual fish marking, radio tagging, and recaptures. So trying to make them, the citizens, a part of each of these projects. Continued monitoring, yeah, there you go. Or you could advance it, Jamie. Continued monitoring is going to be an important part of the project as far as a long-term effort. So really what that is describing is as these management activities or these IPM priorities are implemented, how are they working? What is the overall effect of them? And then what's the response from the carp population, the fishery community, water quality, and the aquatic vegetation? So basically, how effective is the program? And are we seeing the results that we intended? The other thing about continued monitoring is once that biomass has been removed or some habitat alterations have been made to connected water bodies, is that carp population rebounding? A lot of times I'll relate it back to basic invasive species management, whether we're talking about carp, buckthorn, spotted knapweed, garlic mustard. It's really difficult to manage invasive species by going in and employing a one-time management activity, walking away and hoping that it would stay suppressed. I think it's similar to managing a field for spotted knapweed. Go in and survey, where is it, and how much do you have, treat it, herbicides, prescribe burn, and then monitor it every other year, every 3 years. Is it coming back, and are there spot treatments for herbicide that you have to do? Similar to carp management, as we track those populations of those biomass densities, and we're able to reduce them to low levels, is that population creeping back up to that 100 kilograms per hectare threshold?
Well, certainly an impressive plan. Thank you, Tony. It's a lot of work. We're getting kind of towards the end of our meeting, but we should open it up for some feedback. I have just a quick question. It seems like you've been working on barriers in the last year or two. Give me a sense of where you think you are in the universe of barriers. Do you think there's 30 ultimately or 10 ultimately? You've got about 3 or 4 in place.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as barriers go, do you mean barriers within the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District? So we have barriers on the migration routes that we've documented so far. We haven't seen fish move into any of these connected water bodies yet, at least radio tagged fish or pit tagged fish. So as of right now, I'm not sure if we have any additional barrier sites identified for populations that would be within the upper Prior, lower Prior, or Spring Lake basins. The only other potential barrier site would be the ferric chloride, the existing ferric chloride catwalk sheet piling area. I took a bunch of photos of that. Interestingly enough, I was looking at the website the other day and I saw a picture of County Ditch 13 where it almost looked like it was the water on the downstream side of the ferric chloride catwalk was in equilibrium with the wetland above. And so I have identified that, I think in some of the previous reports, as a potential site, not where there would be a new barrier, but where that site could be repaired and fixed. So I have a few recommendations on what could be done for that site, just really retrofitting the existing structure. But as far as other sites, we haven't identified anything else.
So you mentioned not moving between bodies. Arctic Lake was one target that you were looking at, and I think you mentioned Mud Bay, but sort of connected in that area. But you did see movement between those bodies, between Arctic Lake and Upper Prior, right, or Mud?
We didn't document radio tag movement, but last year we had a report of carp in the culvert below Fremont Avenue. So the next day after I got the phone call, we went down there with the radio tag receiver. We heard radio tagged fish in Mud Bay, but nothing in the connecting channel between Mud Bay and Arctic. And then we went to Arctic, and every time we've surveyed, we've checked Arctic, and we haven't seen anything in there. So we saw, I think, 3 adult carp in the connecting channel between Arctic and Mud Bay, but none of them were radio tagged. It's hard to tell definitively if those fish travel out of Arctic and were just staying in that channel, or if they traveled upstream from Mud Bay. My hunch is they probably came out of Arctic. We've stayed in communication with the one landowner on the northeast side of Arctic. He usually will text us or call us or email us and give us some observations on game fish and carp. And last year, he did observe a lot of game fish, a lot of largemouth bass, but he also did observe some carp in there still. The other thing that I think the board would be interested in knowing is the Shakopee and Mdewakanton are interested in completing a fisheries assessment on Arctic. And so we're working with them right now to do a mark recapture bass population estimate and also a carp estimate. We're going to go in there with the electrofishing boat. And then when we do the recapture, the second run with the electrofisher, we'll remove all the carp biomass that we capture.
Manager Spitzmueller.
Tony, I noticed the pictures of the sensors for the counting tag, the pit tag involves stringing wiring above the waterway. So my question, I guess, you know, this question is maybe the answer might be obvious here, but obviously a pit counter cannot be installed in a navigable channel, just as you can't put a barrier in a navigable channel, correct?
Let me get the hang of this mic sooner or later. Thank you, Commissioner Spitzmueller. So there are other alternatives. What the way that we have these arrays laid out, if you can imagine, you saw in the picture, the antenna array travels above the water and then vertically on both sides and around. So we're basically encircling the entire channel, and we want those fish to pass through. We can lay the antenna if the water's shallow enough on the bottom. The problem is that we have reduced range of detection. If the water's shallow enough, we could. We went with that vertical orientation just to increase our range of detection to its maximum amount. But if we did have a suspected migration route and the water's shallow enough, we can just reorient that antenna to lay flat on the bottom and then run the coax up to a receiver on shore. We would just have reduced range. So we'd have to be just cognizant of how we wanted to put that antenna. There are other options beyond radio tags and pit tags. Acoustic tags can work as well. The problem with acoustic tags is that if you have it reduces the efficacy of the receivers to pick up that acoustic signal. And then I guess to go even one step further, there are fixed stations for pit tags. And so depending on the range, you can employ fixed stations on shore and receive the signals from your radio tags and then just do telemetry work to figure out where those tags are. It's a more involved process and more expensive, but I think maybe if we do have additional migration routes that we suspect, or as the project expands or the program expands into other areas within the watershed, and there is a concern for navigation, we could look at just reorienting those antenna arrays.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To follow up on this note, so you said you ran into some people out there and some kids and kind of told them what it was, but I'm curious to know, this is your guys' equipment, not our equipment. And if there's kids who aren't educated, I mean, what if they come and steal the data log or cut that wire or whatever? I mean, we're not on the hook to replace that equipment, or how do you manage the security of stuff like this?
That's a great question, Commissioner Hawley. Thank you. So the first part of the question, it is the district's equipment. So what it involves is the antenna array, and that's relatively inexpensive. What is expensive is the auto tuner. I don't know if you can zoom in on that picture at all, Jamie, to show the boxes. Yeah, there you go. Yep, so actually right where your mouse is, there's an auto tuner box on the end of each of those antennas that gets connected to the data logger cable. And I think those are around $300 a piece. And from there, it travels to the data logger. The data loggers, what we did is we put them in a lock box. It's not metal, but it's high density plastic. And then we wrapped a chain twice around that and put 2 padlocks on it and then cabled that to the landowner's fence. So we tried to keep that as secure as possible, keep it out of sight. The landowners there seemed to be pretty good about making observations, and we saw the landowners there each time we were there. But there is a potential risk for vandalism, I think, on those units. As far as the CPL grant goes, we will be out weekly checking these to make sure they're operational, that the batteries are charged, and that there hasn't been any damage to the units themselves. The data logger boxes, I think, are right around $2,500 a piece, so those are relatively expensive, and I think even more of a loss is the data that we could potentially lose. You know, if we have it deployed out there for a month and we're going a month in between. So that's why we wanted to try to get out there weekly to visit those sites, pull the data off, and just make general observations. One of the landowners also has a security camera pointed at the pit tag array at this location. So if something did happen, hopefully we could work with them to get that footage as well.
And then on the drum barrier?
I presume that's, I mean, it's permanent now, right? And it's we own it, we bought it, we maintain it. It's obviously mechanical in nature, it's got some moving parts, so part of the safety plan, right, is to kind of include things like that, or, you know, should we spray paint on the side, you know, for educational purposes, warning, you know, carp barrier, stay away, whatever, things like that? Is there best practices to manage a more mechanical system like this than just a couple PVC pipes that one might normally see?
Thank you, Commissioner Hawley. Yeah, so it is mechanical, and we designed it to try to be as simple as possible. It would require the least possible amount of maintenance. So as the barrier spins, if it collects vegetation on the upstream side, it's designed so that the velocity of the downstream flow would wash out any debris that's collected on it. The only real mechanical component is where the axle meets, where it goes into those boxes on the right bank and the left bank. It rests on a pivot arm or a bushing. And typically, and I think Jamie would know much more about this, I was surprised to see how high the water was out there. When I measured last November, the stream width, I think, was only 10 feet. And right now, when I installed it, was 14. And when I put the gill nets in that desilt pond last spring, I had to drag my 16-foot lund over the rocks. I barely was able to get it in there, but now I think we could get through there with our electrofishing boat, no problem. So I wouldn't be too concerned with people navigating through that area, but I also think there is some value to some signage potentially, and Maggie and I did talk about that with the pit tag arrays too, just denoting that it's a research project sponsored by the Watershed District, and I think people would appreciate that.
And then when do we owe the
Comments on the draft report, I don't need to go through them here in the public meeting, but send them to staff, and then they get the comments to you. When do you need those by?
If we could get those in a couple weeks, so maybe like the 24th, 25th of the month, and then we'll have a couple weeks to make some revisions and then bring it back to the board for acceptance.
Cool, thank you.
Great. Any other brief questions? Tony, great report. Thank you very much. We appreciate all the work you're doing.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make a comment. Maggie is right now working on a sign that will respond to your concern, Charlie, about danger. This is a research project, and it explains a little bit about what we have in mind. So,
thank you. Thank you, Tony. So we have an action item here on item 4.7, with a vote for a selection of a CARP consulting. Diane, or you want to?
Yes, Mr. Chair and managers, what this does is basically says that for the purposes of additional grants, we'd like to have WSB considered our CARP management consultant. As you can tell, they've done an excellent job with us on the Clean Water Grant, and as we move forward with a Legislative Commission, Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources proposal, as well as other grants, we think it really is to our benefit to have our designated CARP management consultant working with us on these projects. So we'd like to recommend that of the 3 contractors, WSB was one of them in the consultant pool, that we designate WSB so that we can be continued successful on these grant proposals.
Thank you. So the chair is looking for a motion on the board approval of designation of WSB as its CARP management consultant.
I make a motion that the board approves WSB as its CARP management consultant.
Manager Breitbach, second.
I'll second.
Second, Manager Spritzmuller. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion passes 5-0. Again, thank you, Tony. We're looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are now at item number 4.8, submitting an LCCMR grant proposal, and this is a vote on action item. So are we on page 37 in the packet or page 35?
Mr. Chair, you're on page 35.
Okay, thank you.
And we have Tony again to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
He's back.
I'm
Tony.
back for a very brief time. I know your agenda is like super full, but I just have a few quick pages here, and I kind of wanted to give you a basic idea of what we were trying to do here with this grant. Really, I boil it down in 3 basic ideas. It's a 3-year plan to advance the management to a majority of the remaining watershed. I think there's still a lot of questions as to how these other lakes are functioning within the system. And so bringing this management, the IPM management, to these other lakes, developing innovative technologies to increase the efficiencies in our CARP management. So not just the removal that we talked about in the IPM, but what are some other barrier technologies that are being vetted currently in Minnesota and other states that we could potentially use here based on the results from the field trials. And then finally, speaking back to that education and outreach component, create citizen scientists to build strong support for aquatic invasive species management efforts within the watershed and improve water quality. I won't go into the bullet points on the second slide, pretty lengthy, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys had an idea for what we were trying to cover with this grant. And really what it does is it builds upon the work that we've been completing the last 2 years, I think successfully, and gives us the financial ability to keep moving that work forward and bring it to the rest of the watershed. Really, it's closing that noose on the carp population that we've already begun doing on the main basins and really moving that above and below within the watershed.
Tony, do you have a sense of, has the LCCMR considered a proposal like this before? Is this a first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we were successful in working with the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board and the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District to acquire LCCMR funds to do a carp management project in the Lake Nokomis subwatershed. That project is similar to the project that we've been working on here, the MPCA Clean Water Partnership Project. We're also developing an integrated pest management for the subwatershed. And so that was funded in 2015. And we have had some initial meetings with LCCMR staff, and we'll be incorporating their comments into the final proposal.
To be submitted when?
Final submittal is May 15th, this coming Monday.
Thank you. Manager Howley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions. One real quick. I notice we're passing a resolution on this matter. I don't recall ever passing resolutions on every grant proposal we write. Is there something specific about this one that we actually need a resolution?
Maggie?
Mr. Chair, Manager Howley, the LCCMR proposal process requires that you pass a resolution, just showing that the board has support for applying for this, because it's such a lengthy process. So we're applying for it now, but if we get it, we won't get it until July 1st of 2018. So it's a long process. They just want to make sure that the board is also involved in this.
Okay, thank you. And then these budgetary figures in here, this is over 5 years. Does the grant pay this all? Do we pay 50%? How does this figure into our future budgets for each year? And you guys, I'm sure, will track that, of course. So.
Yeah, Manager Howley, so we were going to continue on with the same funding level that we're doing the current grant with, which is between $20,000 to $23,000 a year. So that's, it's been typically above and beyond what we would normally do for CARP management, and we just continue that on with this new grant, because this grant picks up right where the other one leaves off.
Any other questions? Okay, so we have Resolution 17313 before us, an LCCMR proposal, accelerated watershed approach to invasive carp management. Be it resolved that the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District Board of Managers supports the middle of a grant proposal for an accelerated watershed approach to invasive carp management, and be further resolved that the board instructs staff to apply for a grant from the LCCMR. So I'm looking for a motion to support Resolution 17313.
So moved.
Second.
I'm sorry, was that Howley? Look at Hannes. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, one.
Under other, is there any more
Yep,
discussion?
any more
Okay.
discussion.
I didn't notice before, but I noticed that now there's some big number budget items here under the trust fund grant, under the project activities and outcomes, and then that shows a big budget, and there's some big budget items here. Now, I guess, was that all part of the grant? This is what, how does that work?
This is the budget, the grant budget, not our budget, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Manager Brightback, this is the total for all of the work, only $20,000 a year of which will be paid for by the district levy. Everything else will be covered by other partners. Spring Lake Town or Spring Lake Association and Prior Lake Association have will put up like $500 a year, minus all that, and then in kind from partners like the City of Prior Lake and the Meadowalk and Sioux community. So after you take all that out, the rest will be the grant.
I see. Okay, well, thank you for explaining that.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the motions signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed by nay. Hearing no nays, we have 5-0 in favor. Motion passes. I'm sorry, keep turning it on and off.
Page
We're on
38.
38.
Right.
Diane?
Yes, Mr. Chair and managers, this is simply a request that the managers support the salary structure that was reviewed by Sarah Noah at our workshop. So it would be effective on this day, May 9th, 2017. That's correct, Mr. Chair.
I move that the manager support the salary structure prepared by Noah and Associates.
I'll second.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Mr. Chair and members, you might recognize this form. It comes up every year. And basically, it's something that's required by our insurers for our liability coverage. And it's kind of double speak. It's kind of hard to understand what we're voting for here. But what we're saying is we do want to have a limit. So we want to say that an individual claimant would not be able to cover more than $500,000 on any claim. If we check the other one, we'd say that they could go up to $2 million. So we really want the first one.
Microphone.
It's all right.
The motion would be to support the liability coverage waiver form, and that we do not waive the monetary limits on municipal tort liability established by Minnesota statute section 466.04.
We're looking for someone to move the motion that the district administrator just laid out.
Well, I will move that we adopt the motion as read by Dan.
Okay, we have a motion by Manager Spitzmuller, second by Manager Hennis. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Manager Howley.
Just for the record, I believe we did this exact same thing last year, and I think we have to do it every year, so this is no different than what we've already done in the past.
That's
Correct.
our understanding. Okay, hearing no more comment, all in favor, signify by say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Hearing no nays, the motion passes 5-0, and somebody needs to sign this. Is it me? And do you have the document?
Mr. Chair,
He has the
our secretary has it, yes.
Thank you. All right, moving right along here. 4.11, University of Minnesota Graduate Student Liability Agreement, discussion only.
This will be covered by Maggie. She will show you the draft agreement for the bluegill study in a minute.
Mr. Chair, managers, so as we discussed at the last board meeting, the University of Minnesota will be doing this bluegill study at the 12 and 17 wetlands. And on your screens, hopefully in a second, you will see the draft agreement. We've been going back and forth with the University of Minnesota attorneys and Chuck Holtman, our attorney, and we're almost there. They're not going to put the bluegills in until we're ready, but this is trying to cover all of the points that we discussed last time. So it's providing them right of entry. It's building a scope of work that we get approval rights on. It has the indemnification language that Chuck puts in all of our agreements. If there is any repair work that needs to be done due to the work that's being done out at 1217, that it holds the U of M liable to repair that. It also makes sure that they have sufficient assurance according to our standards. And then it also allows us to terminate the agreement at any time. And then it also allows us to set the termination date. So if they do repair work, the contract isn't terminated until we are satisfied with the repairs. And so all those things are basically included in this draft. And Diane has signing authority for the district. We wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of it, if you had any other comments on it. I apologize that we didn't get this to you guys in your board packet and have a nice draft for you to review, but if you have any comments or if you'd like a copy, I can provide that to you. But I welcome any comments, questions at this time.
Comments from the board members?
I have a question that might...
Manager Hennis.
Oops. I have a question that, what are we going to do with the carp there in the East Pond? How are we going to get rid of them?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, so do you mean the carp that are currently there that we found in the yearlings, or like after the study is done? Now? They're leaving what carp are in there, and they're just accounting for that in their calculations for their study. So the few carp that are in there, they're just leaving in there, and they're going to stock the bluegill, do another fish survey, and then stock additional carp based on that. Mr. Manager Hennis, I apologize. And then at the end of the study, we're going to drop the water level as low as possible. And hopefully this year we have a nice hard freeze and they all die off. That's the theory. Otherwise, we'll work with the U of M to look at some retinone treatments or something else to get rid of all the fish in there.
I still find it hard to believe that that pond didn't freeze out over the winter. I mean, how can that be? It's only 3 or 4 feet deep, right? I mean, how can that be? All right, thank you.
Manager Howley?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, please send it to me. I wouldn't mind taking a look at it. But did you not say earlier that as early as tomorrow they're going to put some bluegills in there, but you just said we're not going to let them do it until we get this agreement figured out? So put that together for me, please.
Manager Howley. So I guess received comments from the university attorneys. I just got them back from, comments back from Chuck. So now I just have to merge everything together and have Diane sign it in the morning. And the guy from the U of M is going to have his person sign it electronically. So we should actually have it all wrapped up by tomorrow. but so I'll send that to you before I leave tonight.
So at some point, you don't need a board action to execute this agreement.
Mr. Chair and managers,
Administrator
the
Lynch.
reason is that there isn't any money associated with this. If there was, then that would be something that you folks would have to vote on because it would be outside of our budget, so to speak.
Okay. I'm sorry, goes back and forth. Consent agenda is considered as one item of business that consists of routine administrative items or items not requiring discussion. Items can be removed from the consent agenda at the request of the board member, staff member, or a member of the audience. Please state which item or items you wish to remove for separate discussion. The consent agenda today includes the meeting minutes from the April 11th board workshop and April 11th board meeting that probably ended sooner than this one, and also the CAC minutes on April 27th. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
So moved by Howley. And a second?
Second.
By Spitzmuller. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion passes 5-0. Treasurer's report. Manager Spitzmuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to cash and investments, Northland Securities relatively up a few bucks in terms of our bonds there, but $1,241,000 at Northland, pretty stable. As you recall, we agreed on that bond ladder going back 4 months ago, so that's where the bulk of the Northland securities are. We held back about $300,000 in cash there. With respect to Klein, if you look at the bottom of my not so colorful report there, we started off with about 471, and at the end of April, actually, this is as of the end of April, we're down to about 386 at Klein. So our cash position is fairly, we should be in relatively good shape. I did talk to Cindy Geis at the county, and we will get our first half of the levy will be paid on or before the 21st, so that'll be the latest. So we should see that within about a month or so from Scott County. And that's going to be in the amount of almost $700,000, where $698,000 will be the June payment. So, and then Chris's report shows us something on the order of about, with respect to the district funding clean water, about 27% spent, about 7% against the overall, including the JPMOA. So we're tracking fairly well in terms of our budget for the year. So I would be happy to try to answer questions if you guys have something.
Are there any questions from the managers on the financial report, cash or treasurer's report? Hearing none, do you want to go on to the claims list? Oh, we need a vote. I'm sorry.
Oh, the claims.
Oh, we need to
that's
vote
right.
on the claims list. Okay. Anything you want to mention in the claims list?
Mr. President, I have a question on the claims list.
Manager Hennis.
The 16,000 from SWCD for the first quarter, is that going to be roughly what we're looking at for every quarter, or is this just a piece of the 120,000 that we contracted with them?
This is just a piece of that 128,000, so it's going to fluctuate. This month's request, and in fact, if you would just give me a minute, I can pull the bill out. Most of it has been for the staff report, so support, excuse me. Monitoring and data collection is like 14 or 1,200 of it. Farmer-led council work that they were doing is 2,600. Doing cost share assistance and marketing for cost share is about $10,000, which they did, which is the bulk of it. And then they did educational programming, a little over 2,000. So that's the bill as we know it. And I'm checking with them on the education programming because I'm not sure what that is.
$10,000 for cost share marketing?
Marketing, design, and cost share assistance. So it's basically going out there and talking to landowners, working with them on projects. We don't have any new projects yet for the cost share money, but they're just, they do the hand holding to get them to feel comfortable for actually going ahead and doing the projects.
Manager Spitzmuller.
Question, yeah. Diane, maybe then I see that there's some significant costs that have been included in this list with respect to the WSB work. Is any of this, I'm looking at the carp management, pit tagging, and the drum and so forth. Now, is any of that recoverable under the grant, or is that?
Sorry, not the pit tagging, right, yeah. The barrel, we just got that clean Conservation Partners Legacy grant for that.
Okay.
Yeah, so the bulk of it is paid for by grants.
And we're talking about the MPCA grant, not the LCCMR grant.
Yes, not the LCCMR grant yet.
Thank you. Manager Howley.
That just triggered something in my mind. With the CARP grants, do we front money and pay WSB within 30 days and then we wait for grant money to come in, or do we withhold their invoices until we get the grant money to pay them? It's a cash flow thing. I'm just curious how we currently are managing it.
Mr. Chair, Manager Holly, no, we don't wait until we get paid by the grant. We do have to do quarterly reports and indicate what we've paid, and then we do get it reimbursed, but we don't hold back on the payment.
Okay.
So can I ask one? Okay, so that
Manager
brings up a
Spitzmuller.
question I had, Diane. There was $13,466 deposited in our account during the last month. Would that then be grant funding coming in?
No, that was actually from Fish Point Park, I think. It was
Oh,
the
that was-
remainder. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion to approve the claims list. Now that we know what a drum barrier costs, is there anybody who wants to make that motion?
All right, I'll go out on a limb and move that we approve the claims list.
Okay, moved by Manager Spitzmuller, seconded by
Second.
Manager Breckbach. Any other comments, questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes 5-0. And that takes care of the treasurer's report, and we have just a couple of upcoming events, carp tournament and the CAC meeting.
Mr. President, I have a question on the carp tournament.
Manager Hennis.
Where are we at that? Is everything locked and loaded? Are we ready to roll on that? Have we gotten confirmations from Thane Tandy?
Mr. Chair and managers, we had talked with a few of you at our board check-in meeting last week, and I understand that Manager Spitzmuller is going to check in with Thane just to make sure that everything is on track. As you know, the tournament has appeared on their website, kind of down a ways, but they don't have any format for having people sign up online or anything like that. So we've given them until May 10th to show us that they have 13 teams signed up, and we're looking forward to Manager Spitzmuller helping us to ensure that happens.
Yeah. And
Manager Spitzmuller.
It's been a little tough tracking down Thane, but I have exchanged an email at least with him, and he says he's, at this point, he's confident he's going to come up with the teams that we have requested. I will, so tomorrow is his deadline for, I'll stop by there and see what's new.
How many teams was it? 13?
13.
13?
Yes.
13 minimum. All right.
13 teams, yeah.
Any other questions about the carp tournament? Anything about the CAC meeting on May 25th from 6:30 to 8, Bear Lake?
Also, I'm sorry, what's the time frame of the carp tournament? It starts at 8 o'clock at night to 8 in the morning, or what?
You know, I haven't even seen a time. I don't know. But the positive things, as both of you said at our meeting last week, was that this is the first night carp tournament we've helped support. And so given what Cedar Lake Improvement Association has done over on evening carp tournament, there is a lot of hope that it'll get a lot more carp in.
My point being is if they're going to go till like hopefully 8 o'clock Sunday morning, if we get some advertising out there, we might get some people who want to stop in to see the final weigh.
Right, but that's up to Nadior to do that.
Yeah, I know. This has been an experience, I'll tell you. Thank you.
Okay, at the risk of hearing any more about carp, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Second by Brett Park. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you. Passes 5-0.